What you see here is pretty typical in the industry. A client asks you, could you please animate for me a pen writing a word, like the name of the article, of the brand or whatever. Please write it with a nice camera motion and with a nice pen so that it's very convincing. So this is not exactly very convincing because it's pretty rough and dirty and quick, but basically this is the job done. So this is another camera angle where you see that the stroke actually has some structure. There are many ways to achieve this goal. Basically, systematically, one would be to create an emitter at the tip of the pen and emit particles or liquid of whatever kind. And the other way would be to create a curve which resembles the written word and then hook everything else to it. Both methods in principle have two advantages and several disadvantages. One advantage for the particle solution is that it doesn't matter whatever you want to write, the pen always will emit particles at the tip of the pen, so you can write anything. Whereas with a curve model, which I used here, the curve is kind of fixed, and once you have the curve, everything needs to serve that curve. So let me show you how this can be done with the version number 2, which is the curve version without particles. This is so neat and simple. Let's go to curves and surfaces. Here we have the NURBS curves. This section basically. This is the curve which you paint by hand. I usually use this in an orthogonal window. Like this is the top view. This would be the grid. I don't need it here. And I grab my graphics tablet pen, select this icon here, and I draw foam. So that's foam in the top window, and it looks like this in the perspective view. Now we want to create a pen, and in order to stylize the pen, we just pick polygon cylinder. Let's select the edge down here, double click so the whole part will be selected, and I'll scale it down so it's going to be quite thin, and that's basically my pen. Go back to object mode and scale it up a little bit like this. So this is my pen. In order to animate it better, we change the pivot by pressing Insert, and with the key V, which is objects snapping, I guess, we move it all the way down and press Insert again. So the pivot now is here. So when we scale it from that side. When we move it from that side. And so this is just fine. We can slightly tilt it because the writing will be typically from a right-hand side like this, from a left-hander like this. And give it another color. New material, Arnold shader, and surface shader, and we give the color a ramp like here. In order to see it, we need to click here. This is the ramp now, and this is going to be the ink, which we can turn yellow. This is just a stylization, whatever. Now we need to attach the pen to our curve. How do we do this? Always the same procedure. The master, which is the curve, and then the slave. The slave is the one who, or which follows that master, which is basically the stroke I just painted or drew. So modeling is not the proper menu set here. We do animation, and under constraint we find the motion paths, and we use the option box here, and the time range is set to the time slider, which is just fine, and it follows that line. We apply it and close. So what we have now, when we run the simulation or the animation, the pen runs along that path. If we want to modify the path, and it accelerates right here and it decelerates right here, if that's a bit too much for us, we can select the motion path here, press select, and then we go to Windows and Animation Editors and Graph Editor, and here we find the animation path. We can insert points here and say, okay, here we want to slow it to slow down again, then here accelerate, etc. For simplicity reasons, I'll leave it as it is. So we have this kind of steady motion which accelerates here and finally reaches the end, which is just fine. Now we need something which appears as the ink here. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we go to modeling. Oddly enough, it's under modeling, and we generate a PaintFX thing. And in order to use PaintFX, you need to grab a brush. So get a brush, and I go to the oil settings here, the oil options, and I just pick a blue oil ink, so to say. And now I could paint that ink on the surface, which I don't want. I want the ink to appear on that foam line here. I go back to generate, and here you have curve utilities. And under curve utilities, you can attach the brush, which we just selected, the blue oil, to the curve. And I think we need to select the curve first, like this. Then we go back to that menu, curve utilities, attach the brush we've just selected to that curve, and now it's here. When you render it with Arnold, you will only see black because the paint effects need to be converted to polygons, which we won't do in this tutorial. It's pretty simple, really. Under modify and convert paint effects to polygons. But here we need Maya as the renderer. Let's click here. Arnold is the default renderer. You see it here. We go to Maya software and re-render it here, and then you see here the line, what the pen writes. Of course, the pen does not actually write it currently, so the pen is here, and we have the whole stroke finished from the beginning to the end. So that's the last thing we're gonna animate. And funnily enough, we don't have to search for that parameter. It's right here. So we have this stroke selected because we just introduced it. We attach it to the curve. And here we have the stroke shape. That's exactly what we're talking about, the shape of that ink thing here, or that oil pen here, or brush. And here we have the minimum and the maximum clip. It's about the end bounce, where it begins and ends. And the minimum clip is this. I'm only moving the slider here. And since we write from left to right, we can leave it like this and only animate the maximum clip. So we go back to the very beginning of the animation, which is frame 1. Set a keyframe with the right mouse button for maximum clip 0. And then we go to the end and we set it to 100 because the line is finished by then, and set another key. So this is what the animation looks like. If you change the pace of the animation so that the pen slows down here, for example, you need to change that curve as well. You select it, you basically select the stroke shape. Again, I think it was selected anyway. And you go to Windows, Animation Editors, and to the Graph Editor. And here you have the same line as we've seen before from the pen movement. This now is the movements, the animation of that of the maximum clip. If we break the tangents here and make this linear, we will get a problem because you see the stroke is ahead and finally too slow. So they need to be linked. In order to fix this, we could select the pen, the motion path. This is the animated parameter here. Select it, go to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editors, and break the tangents here as well. Now everything will be in sync again, and no fading in or out. Like with many things in computer animation, it comes down to the idea of the procedure you want to have. Bye-bye.